We're approaching this sort of singularity, and we're nearing the event horizon of AI being as capable as us in digital and physical worlds. And how can those be our brothers and sisters that are helping us to achieve more in this world? I think if we do it that way, abundance is just the start.
What if artificial intelligence isn't the job killer we fear, but the catalyst for unprecedented human flourishing? While many worry about AI's risks, there's a compelling case to be made that we're on the brink of an era where technology amplifies our creativity, solves our biggest challenges, and unlocks possibilities we've barely imagined. What could go right when humans and AI work together?
Welcome to Socially Conscious AI, where we explore the cutting-edge innovations transforming our world for the better, and bring you conversations with the brilliant minds and ethical pioneers who are harnessing AI's power to address humanity's greatest challenges. I'm Valencio Cardoso.
And I'm Roman Burkott, and today we're thrilled to welcome Justin Bean, a tech executive and investor focusing his work on building a future of sustainable abundance. He's worked globally on projects related to smart cities, AI, sustainable industry, and transportation, both at startups and Fortune 500s. He's also the author of the book, What Could Go Right? Designing Our Ideal Future to Emerge From Continual Crises to a Thriving World. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. Excited to have this conversation.
Well, appreciate you being on, Justin. Looking back at your history, right? Like just thinking about where you started and how you got here and this journey that you've been on, right? Like what kind of inspired you and your optimistic approach to sustainability?
Yeah, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and so we're out hiking every weekend, going camping. There's a lot of connection to nature. We had a lot of pets, right? And so there was a lot of respect for the natural world. And in the combination of living in a city where you see the human aspect, human impacts, and what we do, I noticed a lot of sort of looking at only the negatives, right? Like human beings are this horrible cancer on the world and we destroy everything. But there's I mean, obviously we're a beautiful species and we do incredible things, right? And we're so unique that I felt like a lot of people were sort of missing the message that we're actually doing some really cool stuff. And so wanted to go out in the world and figure out how do we combine these two sort of approaches of human business and economics with protecting the environment, being regenerative, and sort of living in harmony with the world that we depend on and the world that we're a part of. So, that's kind of what inspired me from the beginning, was kind of that connection and also being excited about all the innovations going on. And how can we, instead of burn it all down and start from scratch, which usually ends up in something way worse, how can we build on what we've created and really funnel our innovation and our work and our money and resources into building a better world.
Kind of touching on positive impact and then you sharing your models and your ideas, right? In your book, like What Could Go Right, I know that challenges the idea that sustainability is about sacrifice. How did you kind of come to see that abundance is the key to a better future for us?
I think it goes back to that original tension, right? That we can either have human beings or we can have the environment, right? And it's almost this false choice between, like, we are by nature destructive and we need to have it all to be happy, but the environment is going to suffer, in that case. And I think that's a false choice. That we come from this environment, and also we do a lot of damage through the business and industrial revolution that we've had. But there's a transition that's happening under our feet that's really a tectonic shift in how we go about economics and how we go about business. So that whether it's materials or energy or the way that we consume things, there's a shift that's quickly going into transitioning every product, every industry, every service into something that's more sustainable. And luckily, we're doing it sort of proactively, even though sometimes we're pretty reactive and wait much longer than we should. But I think it's an inevitability that by nature, sustainability is something that reduces the risks and the externalized costs of things, which eventually come to bite you in the back. But in general, if you're making something that wastes less, it's going to be less expensive. And so, therefore, you have a better economic approach to fulfilling the needs and desires of people. So, looking at it through the lens of sustainable abundance, I started looking at, how might we think about these different aspects of human living from that tension of sustainability and from abundance. And you can look at societies that come from, let's call it, if we look at the graphic for sustainable abundance, uh, unsustainable scarcity. Right, this is kind of the worst of the worst. You're struggling to survive every day, and you're burning through a forest just to get that possum that you can eat for dinner, right? And
Awesome.
right, whatever it is that's left over from the forest that you've started a wildfire for, and living in current society that there's a lot of people still living in scarcity, and so they're burning not just environmentally unsustainable but human health unsustainable materials to cook, to warm themselves, and it's a tough place to be. What I think we've done in a lot of ways is we've, through the Industrial Revolution, through digitization, and many other things, reached an era of unsustainable abundance. And that has brought billions and billions of people out of poverty and into a world of pretty much abundance. I mean, if we were to, look back at our relatives living in the 1800s anywhere around the world and then complain to them that our Wi-Fi isn't connecting, they would, throw us out of the hut or the house or whatever they were living in at the time. Right. So we're living in a wonderfully abundant world. We're just on a crash course with the environment that can't support the way we do things. And so, to your point, there has been a move in sort of the environmental industry and across a lot of these conversations towards degrowth and limiting the human experience. Your children are just going to have to sacrifice and not have a life like you had. And that just doesn't go with the human spirit or the human needs. And so shifting into sustainable scarcity is not going to work either, right? Even when you get a little bit of inflation, you get a little bit of scarcity, especially for people who are used to abundance, society starts falling apart pretty quickly. And the rules that we live by and the structures that support us and the things that we rely on start not delivering what we need, and we start breaking down socially. And so that doesn't work either. So we're at another dead end. So we've clashed with the environment through abundance, and the ecology breaks down. Therefore, the economy breaks down. We get to sustainable scarcity. And sure, we can operate at that level for a while, but at some point, human beings are just going to want more. Unless you have some horribly authoritarian state that's controlling everything, and nobody wants that. That eventually breaks down too. So another dead end. So the only real viable future that I see is sustainable abundance, where we're able to meet the needs of humanity in a way that's not, having less every generation, but really growing into more experience, more impact, being able to do a lot with our lives, but in a way that is sustainable and works within the boundaries of the environment we live within and the society that we live within.
I really like that sustainable abundance takes like a balanced perspective, and also that you key into the fact that it can be economically beneficial to be the ones that are innovating in a sustainable manner. Um, I've heard you talk about the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. And I was hoping you could cover a little bit about why it's important to balance all three, and how do you apply that to your work.
Yeah, we measure businesses in different ways, right? Classic accounting 101 is you've got your cash flow, you've got your balance sheet, and you're measuring things in a certain way. You've got your KPIs, you've got some regulatory requirements, and you have to, submit your financials through GAAP certified and accounting. And so what we've classically done is externalized a lot of our costs, externalized a lot of our problems to the environment around us. We started developing some regulations that say, hey, you can't dump these poisonous chemicals in the Ohio River, right? And then just set it on fire. You can't, allow people in Flint, Michigan to have lead in their water and do that as a result of industrial manufacturing. You can't just start outsourcing these things to other countries that have lower regulations. You can for a short period of time, but eventually everything catches up with you. So when thinking about the business, you have to be thinking about the financial value, which we've always thought about, sort of the operational value and how you build these things into the business, and also the environmental and social value. Because those are sort of the permissions that we get from the society and from the environment to support the business. So, People, Planet, Profit is really about sort of taking away that real tension between environment and people and seeing how we can benefit all of the above. How can we design businesses through things like B Corps or just reforming the way that we do business or target our products, which products we make on our roadmap to solve these challenges? Because business is really one of the main ways that humans create value in the world. Government does a lot, there's a lot of nonprofits, but I'd say 80, 90% of our activity is business. And so if we direct business at solving these grand challenges that we have, like environmental challenges or social equity and poverty, literacy, whatever it is, we can really tackle these solutions if we're smart enough to figure out the right business models and the way to bring it in. And so measuring that value through triple bottom line accounting, value creation, just thinking about it that way is a way that you can incorporate those sort of fluffy metrics into the hard science of doing business. And the more support we have from governments and regulations, and from industry groups, and from the companies that are building these things, and from the entrepreneurs and innovators that are out there building it, the faster we get there, and the more success the people in those roles have.
And so, to your point, maybe this is a job for AI. I'm curious your thoughts on how does AI move us in a direction of abundance rather than exacerbating that mindset of scarcity.
Yeah, I think this is a great example. I mean, if I ask you, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when we combine AI and robotics? Terminator, right? We immediately think of a
Right.
robot stepping on a human skull. This horrible image of our future, and no one wants to live in that. Um, but the reality that we're seeing is, yes, every transition like this, when we invented machinery that decoupled work from our human muscles and from the muscle of animals, we eliminated a lot of mundane work that people were doing and a lot of dangerous work. But we were able to create way more than we ever had before, and many new jobs came up. Uh, with AI, it's similar. We have a lot less time to transition because the Industrial Revolution gave us, a century, or at at least like 50 years. AI is happening in less than a decade, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all of the targets that we have for AGI, which is a debate of whether or not that it will ever exist, but anything close to it where AIs can do a lot of the jobs that we do is coming up really quickly. So, does that go into a bit of conflict? Sure. But I think if we are able to think about the tools that AI gives us, if all of us have these AIs that are trained in a certain role, and we have a task or a job that we want to do, I can do so much more as a founder or an entrepreneur if I am starting out with a team of 10, 20 specialists that can help me get that company launched, figure out the right way to do it so I'm not just spinning my wheels and wasting my time, and connect with resources. So everybody kind of up levels to a manager in some way, and a manager of these AIs that, of course, you're going to need human beings to collaborate and have real commerce in the real world. Otherwise, we just have robots talking to robots, and what are we doing? Who knows? And maybe that's the goal, and they just give us this like abundant basic income, and we go hang out in communities and solve interesting problems and go out to the stars and are enabled by our robot friends. I don't know, but there's something in that direction where all of us now have access to resources, just like we did through physical automation, and now we've been able to decouple thinking from the human brain. That can have terrible consequences and make us all really lazy, or it can empower us to go out and do incredible things that we otherwise wouldn't have been capable of doing, especially when the substrate of the economy is becoming more and more digital, so that more of what we can do is digital, and AI can do more of that digital work. We'll then move into robotics that are enabled by AI, and that brings AI into the physical world to start doing some of the work and jobs that we do with our physical bodies. So instead of only focusing on the negatives, which I think there's abundant amounts of articles and conversations going on about what could go wrong in that situation. But instead, what could go right? And that takes a lot more flexibility of mind and thinking to really imagine a world that we're not used to, and it's going to fundamentally change. So we're approaching this sort of singularity, and we're nearing the event horizon of AI being as capable as us in digital and physical worlds. And how can those be our brothers and sisters that are helping us to achieve more in this world? I think if we do it that way, abundance is just the start, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate your optimism. And it's kind of interesting because the other day I came across a billboard that said, stop hiring humans,
Right.
right? And and that's an interesting message, right? Because that kind of perpetuates the fear of like AI taking our jobs, causing harm, and like feeds into our negativity bias over there, right?
Mhm.
What are some ways that AI could actually help with creating more meaningful work and improving our lives?
So the campaign that you're mentioning is from Artesian, which is a company based out of San Francisco, I believe. And I've seen some of those billboards, and I've also seen some of the reporting from that company about their kind of unearned impressions that they've gotten from this campaign. Just like clickbait, just like everything else that is sort of the negative side of AI with advertising that we've seen, they're getting a lot of free press, and they're getting a lot of conversations started about them because they're like playing off of that fear. And it's a really smart campaign. We can debate the ethics of it and everything else, but the point kind of being, how do you change your mental model to focus on what are you going to do about it, right? Like, what are you going to use this for? Do you really enjoy doing some of the work that AI is now doing for us? And I think a lot of people would say no. Right. I mean, and you're asking for some kind of concrete examples, and we're seeing a ton of really interesting innovations come out. So for example, the Y Combinator batch that just came out, you know I don't know what percentage it is, but I'd say 80+% is AI. There was one startup called Cactus AI that is all about being your solopreneur co-founder, right? That takes care of some of this back end stuff of operations, and some of the work that you don't necessarily want to do as a founder, right? Because most founders, you want to go out and talk to customers, you want to figure out the problem, and then you want to like architect a solution and imagine what could be, and then go build it. Do you want to go do your financial reporting and like go redline your contracts for hours, and get into these like minutia of running the business? It's probably good that you do at least once. But there's a lot of AI that can help you with those sorts of things. Even a few years ago, I think it was JP Morgan built an AI to interpret commercial contracts, and they were able to do in seconds and maybe minutes what it would take 360,000 lawyer hours to do. So saving a ton of money, saving a ton of time, and that's JP Morgan, right? That's one of the biggest companies on earth. That type of AI is now available to anyone on this podcast and anyone listening, right? So if you can go out as a solopreneur and get all that back end stuff taken care of that you don't really want to work on, you can focus on the things that you love doing. I mean, there's a lot of examples that we see in the world. ChatGPT is obviously the one that everybody knows about and uses, but even just putting a wrapper on that has gone in a million different directions. From drug development, I just talked to an entrepreneur who was looking at material development. So instead of focusing on one molecule as a PhD scientist, what if you could create a way of starting with the end in mind? I'm a manufacturer. I need this type of tensile strength, this type of water resistance, and blah blah blah. Uh, and then tell me a sustainable alternative to my sheetrock or my steel or the wood that I use, or whatever it is, even on like a small molecular basis. So I think that can have incredible improvements in the way that we build things. So we could go for hours on all these new innovations and ways that AI is being used in all these positive directions. I mean, look at SpaceX, right? Like that rocket is not running on someone with some controllers, right? Like sitting in the home base. That's AI on every little motor and every little twist, and then looking at the overarching system and figuring out in real, millisecond time, what do I do to make this rocket not blow up? Have they gotten there yet? Not quite. It has blown up quite a few times, but it's a great example of physical world first of its kind solution that's out there doing things that weren't possible a few years ago because of AI and some really hardworking engineers.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the SpaceX example because as we record this, I think they lost a ship last night,
Good. Yeah.
and but it reminds me of when we look at sci-fi, Terminator aside, a lot of sci-fi is very optimistic. It's like, oh, well, we have the energy and the engineering and the technology to get us wherever we're going to go and to, accomplish whatever we want to do. So I really appreciate that example in terms of for a split second decision that, can, keep a ship safe or not. Yeah, you need AI to be able to think as fast as that, but ultimately you want people at the controls to really kind of decide where's the ship going to go in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, we human beings still have incredible creativity and drive to do things. I mean, I don't know how much you've tried to do a lot of creative thinking with AI, but often because it's trained on sort of consensus of averages of what information is out there, you often get some pretty consensus answers. And I'm sure someone will create a solution to that and create something that's more innovative. But I think that's going to be sort of a hard problem for a while. That we still are better at sort of envisioning this grand future and then getting there and not doing it just because we've heard it in different permutations through different movies and books, but because we can really create a world in our minds that we can then go and build. Whereas AI is still sort of aggregating what humans have done and feeding that back to us in some way.
Justin, I know you've led projects all over the world. I'm curious if you've had an opportunity to really apply AI specifically in some of these projects aimed at making sustainable abundance.
Yeah. A lot of the sort of computer vision projects use AI to capture what's happening in the world around us, and that can be used to, improve the way that transit operators are able to provide service to riders, which gives us better service, better riding, and more sustainable transportation options. So I think it's more about providing the foundations that the community of innovators need to be successful. So things like data exchanges, so creating marketplaces of different data where you as a provider can monetize the data that you have so that someone else can use it to build in combination with other types of data, the next Uber or some other innovation. And that could be universities, startups, big companies, governments. Of course, there's a lot of privacy. There's a lot of taking individual data out of it, getting to the metadata level or cleansing the data or whatever it is. And AIs can also help us with that in a lot of cases. You can do privacy protection on video or in other areas using AI. So all that stuff is just evolving so rapidly that something that was kind of mind blowing 10 years ago is now something you can do on a phone.
I'm glad you brought up that example of computer vision or AI vision. I was watching an interview with Elon Musk who was talking about how the Tesla self-driving only uses cameras and it doesn't use lidar and all these other sensors.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I'm thinking, well, that's short-sighted. Like you've got all this advanced technology you could put on a car that would work so much better. But then he said the key thing. He goes, people drive cars and you don't have lidar and lasers and radar built into your head. You just look and drive.
Right.
I was like, damn, that's a really good point,
Yeah.
and so the quality of computer vision is just really astounding now, in developing so fast.
Yeah. And, just like that, photons in, action out. Right. And that's kind of what we do when we're driving. That being said, I mean, I've taken Waymos and Cruise and, full self driving Teslas and all of that. And having more of those sensors could be more useful in the near term. It's a harder problem to solve in a lot of ways, to do it with purely vision, or purely with cameras. And LiDAR has advantages, and I felt very safe in the Waymos. I felt pretty safe in the Cruises. Felt safe in Teslas. But it's these sort of edge cases, right? And so when does it get to a point where it's as good or better? Tesla will claim it is better today than a human driver, and on average, it is. In edge cases, I'm not sure, right? Who knows? There's some pretty bad human drivers out there too, so who knows?
That's hilarious. I'm a big, tech advocate, and yeah, I won't get in any of them.
Oh, really? It's a really interesting human experience, right? Because you get into this thing and you are like, you know, on the edge for about 10 to 15 seconds. And then you start having a conversation with the other person in the car or checking your phone. And you very quickly forget that there's a robot driving the car. And I didn't expect that at all, right? At first, I got in, I was like, this is so cool. And I'm videotaping it and all that. And I'm like, do I have to hold this anymore? Because this is just a car ride. And I even last time we were in San Francisco, me and my girlfriend went and took a Waymo, and she is very much not super into tech. She's kind of like, yeah, I don't know. And then same thing happened. We got in the Waymo, and she's like, yeah, this is kind of cool. And then we just started having a conversation, and then before we know it, we were there. So I think it's one of those things that we'll get used to really fast once it scales out.
The key point I think you mentioned there is becoming ubiquitous, right? It's like kind of scaling out.
Mm,
And I think the other thing that I heard in there too, it's kind of like any other relationship, right? You kind of start off with a little bit of apprehension, and you build trust over time, right?
yeah.
Um, and I think as more and more people, like, I want to encourage them to kind of get involved and, like, not be too scared about, like, even just experimenting with it, right?
Mm.
Um, how do we encourage more people to kind of see themselves as like agents of change and like not just consume technology passively, like switch that
Mm.
mental model?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, and a really interesting one to explore, because I think similar to sort of the divergence we see in health, right? When we were able to create food at incredible levels and all varieties from extremely healthy to extremely not healthy, but it's so affordable, everybody can have whatever they want. And there's some cultural elements to it too. But I think we've seen a divergence in health where there's people who exercise all the time. They're eating really healthy food. They kind of track their metrics, and a lot of those people, I hope, on average, are going to live very long, healthy lives. There's a lot of people who just still get big gulps and are eating donuts and all kinds of sugar and stuff throughout the day and don't get a lot of exercise because it is so easy. It's easy to get that food. It's easy to just like sit in front of the TV or stare at your phone for hours. And I think we're seeing a real divergence in physical and mental health with those types of choices. And so I think that just underscores the importance of what you're asking. Um, how can we do it? It probably starts pretty early on. We probably need some kind of like AI and digital education in elementary, middle, high schools, and even just through the apps. I actually just watched a documentary on CNN last night about tribes in the Amazon that are lightly contacted, but they pretty much are just living as we did hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. And they brought Starlink and cell phones into those villages. And it was pretty immediate that, everybody was sort of gathered around a phone watching basically Brazil's TikTok, right? And, watching silly like, cat videos, which I think is a good thing. But, and all these crazy, outrage videos and sort of erotic, semi erotic videos that are out there. And like, it was just this bomb of information just hit their village. And at first everybody was addicted. It kind of looked like an opium den or something. But the village elders said, this is a real problem, we need to do something about this. And so they started designating certain hours in the morning and in the afternoon that they would turn the Starlink on. And so they'd only have access to it for like 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening. Otherwise, people had to just go out and play soccer and go fishing and do all the things they would otherwise. But the kids had gotten the hit at this really young age, and you could just see it immediately that they're just kind of staring without blinking at these phones in the dark, and it was disturbing. But we've gotten used to that here, right? And we've got all the freedom, which is a great thing to be able to do it. But yeah, how do we build those safeguards into our the technology itself, into, I don't know if it's regulation that needs to do it, but into education systems and parenting and all of that, because you don't want a similar divergence in human intelligence and human mental health, because maybe some people take the big gulp route, right? And they're just like, sure, kid, I don't want to answer your silly questions, so stare at this phone for 12 hours a day. Versus, hey, like, how can you use this to do something in the physical world or with your friends, and go build a startup, or figure out how to solve a social challenge. What can you do for homelessness? Like, can you go and volunteer? And so I think it ends up being about what are the challenges that you can solve with this, and getting excited about it, because it's actually way more fulfilling than just letting an AI pull you into some social media rabbit hole for hours and hours.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And like, as a parent myself, right? Um, I think the managing screen time is the key thing that I have
Mm,
to think about, right, with my
yeah.
kids. Because if I give them the iPad, they'd sit there for hours. And then just balancing like real life play, right, which is where we kind of actually leverage our neural connections, right, and get creative, um, with understanding technology and then leveraging that and seeing kind of connecting the two and seeing, like, to your point, like prompting them for good, right? Like what are things that they care about that they can kind of
And you touched
tackle?
on something else that I want to make sure we kind of unpack, which is the democratization of AI,
Mm.
right? Like, AI has been around for a long time. We just called it, machine learning or whatever, deep learning, whatever, different types of AI. But it was mostly for business customers and industrial and some commercial. But with the sort of chat GPT explosion, we've put those tools in people's hands. And I think that's what creates the abundance, is the access, right? And so if we can focus that abundance on helping people to see what it can do for them, not be afraid of them, not be afraid of it, but be respectful of their own minds and their own health. But go further than, hey, this is a nice replacement for Google. um, and I've heard it sort of diced out by generation, right? That, like, yeah, so boomers are using it as a Google replacement, millennials are using it as like a personal therapist or life coach, and then Gen Z and Alpha are using it as an operating system. And pros and cons all the way around, but uh, I think the more we can think more deeply about how it can be an operating system and at what level we should trust it as an operating system, but that all of us, like I said, can have this team of people or experts or action takers, now that we have agentic AI and AI agents that can go out and actually do things for us. All of us can do a lot more because of the democratization of artificial intelligence.
That's interesting. That phrase you talked about, democratization of AI. So on the one hand, now pretty much anybody with a smartphone can access AI, really sophisticated AI, to do all kinds of mundane or inspiring, elevated tasks. But I'm at the same time, I have a I don't know, some sort of a reservation around the fact that the AI is still all really in the hands of the mega corporations. So when we talk about like abundance and democratization, I still have like the negative idea about like, yeah, but only a few corporations are training the models and influencing like what are those responses going to be that everybody gets.
Mhm.
I'm curious, how do you see the tension there?
Yeah, I mean, is are we going to have the compute wars, right? Like, is it going to be the country or the community or the corporation that owns the most compute wins, right? Because they're able to have the most AI. I think that's a fun Hollywood flick, right? Like Waterworld or any kind of nuclear apocalypse. But in another sense, yeah, there's something really serious there about you know the patterns that we've seen and the ways that AI has been used. there's a lot of negative, right? Like we talked about the AI in advertising and in social media, and how it is learning how your brain works in order to train your brain to do what it wants you to do, which is click on certain stories, click on ads, and what gets people higher excitations is outrage, or often violence or sexuality. And those are all parts of our human experience. But I think through AI taking the lead, those have become, at least in social media, if you consume it a lot and you believe it, you think that's 80-90% of the world, right? And so we saw that with sort of the division of beliefs about what was happening in the world and what was a problem with like the 2016 election, right? We had the scariest part of that for me was how many people said, I have no idea what world these people are living in, regardless of which side of the political spectrum you were on. They said the same things, right? And so AI has been used to pull us apart and make us believe that these other people, whoever this other group is, are somehow inhuman, somehow dumber, inferior in some way, or just willfully ignorant to the truth. And that's so dangerous. And that can be used in incredibly nefarious ways, and is, I think, being used in a lot of bad ways. Can it also be used? Say what you want about China, they do censor some of what is on social media. And so if you go look at TikTok in China, you're not seeing a bunch of bar fights and girls in bikinis dancing around. You're seeing community projects, you're seeing educational videos, you're seeing things about family and participating in your community. And call that propaganda, but it's one positive side of how things can be managed. And maybe that's parental controls, or some other way of or apps, an opportunity for an app that you're able to give your kids that shows them these good messages and puts those thoughts in front of them or in their heads that community is important and you are empowered to live your life how you want. You don't have to fall into these sort of stereotypes of bar fights, or being the tough guy, or disliking this one group or the other. That we're all a human family and we're all earthlings here. Our cats, dogs, other friends out there, and let alone humans, right? Like, we're so close to each other that it's just absurd that we would get so disconnected. But that shows the negative power of AI, that it's able to do that. So we need a lot of thinking around how to direct that in a positive way.
Yeah, that's actually been one of my big concerns as a parent, even pre generative AI. Just when we were kids, we had 3 or 5 TV stations. Everybody watched all the same shows.
Mm.
Everybody knew the same stories. There was that cultural through line. So, not the fact that everybody was watching that same show, but we understood the references, if you will. And now, like, when I look at my son's, media consumption habits, he has no interest in like actual produced shows.
Hmm.
He just wants to watch, reels and TikToks and Vines and YouTubes and all that. And when he talks to his friends, I guess the sense of community seems to come out of like sharing. Have you seen this meme? Yeah, I have.
Hmm.
Yeah, have you seen this meme? No, I haven't. That's really funny.
Hmm.
But there's not like this, I guess, canon of these are the stories that our culture recognizes. Like
Right.
you invoke the visual imagery from Terminator 2. That first scene. It was like everybody knows that.
Yeah.
You could mention it to my son. He'd be like, "What's that? What?
Right.
Is that some boomer flick?"
Oh, kids these days.
Yeah. So I feel like the question maybe kind of well, it's good, healthy for us to address some of those concerns, but I also we were talking about how to make these changes into the culture. A lot of that just comes down to good old fashioned change management, helping people see the art of the possible.
Hmm.
So to that point, I wanted to ask you: are there any particular like AI projects that really have you inspired, that you look to kind of keep your energy up and your will to drive forward?
Uh, I think for me, it's more about the number of AI projects that are using it in positive ways. That there are so many creative people, especially young people, who are learning in totally different ways. I saw a professor give homework the other day that was, go to this AI by Greg Eisenberg that like scrapes Reddit and looks for startup ideas, and then use this AI that helps you like strategize and draw out, what your ideas are, and then use this AI that can take your instructions and then go build something, and then use this other one that helps you figure out how to take it to market. And like, I wish I had that class. That would have been great. Instead of looking in a book at all this economic theory and, micro, macro economics, which are fascinating, but like, where does the rubber hit the road? And so his homework was go do it. And there's no better way of doing it than that. So, yeah, talking to, you know, undergrad university students that are so sharp, so well informed, and speaking in, eloquent ways and informed ways that like I was never at that point, right? Like I thought I was pretty smart, but like I would have they would have no competition from me. Um, and yeah, and seeing how that empowerment has given so many people the ability to go create things. So to me, it's more that and like the number of them happening. Any one particular project, I can get inspired. Every new week there's something new coming out. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. That's the solution. But yeah, they're all pretty amazing. And the way that it interacts with the physical and digital world, I think, is driving a lot of really interesting abundance. Um, Whether it's space tech or climate tech or biotech or anything else, we're reaching these incredible levels of sophistication and abundance that, yeah, I don't think we can even dream what that could look like in 100 years. All of Star Trek even seems super old school. Like, yeah, you got warp drive and you like push yourself faster to the other side of the universe, but like there's no internet. Come on, what's going on here? Right? You don't have a like BCI that's like telling you the answers and helping you like telepathically coordinate with everybody on the ship, and like you have to sit around and discuss this stuff forever. Like, yeah, I think it's beyond what we can even think about.
Right. The Borg were the only advanced ones in that show, right?
Yeah, that's where we don't really want to go. For sure.
You did start to touch on, the challenges of both. We have unprecedented amounts of data available to us, and therefore, that's basically the fuel for AI, if you will. Um, we spoke to a guest, I believe it was Andy Spizzati, who was working on projects to contribute data to libraries for AI consumption and basically contribute and help people find the models that they need and the
Hmm.
data that they need to build great new stuff.
Hmm.
But to your point, there's also that need to make sure that it's compliant for privacy and safety and security. It's this incredible tension, or kind of fine line that we have to walk, where you've got AI hoovering up all the data in the universe, but we also want to make sure that, like, well, I don't want you to have my data.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, right? Like, do we just move to a more transparent society and everybody kind of has access to some kind of data that we wouldn't have expected otherwise? Like, if we're kind of going back to the dystopias, like I think Orwell was brilliant, but kind of had it. I believe that, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley was much more accurate in where we see ourselves going today. That it's not that some grand state is oppressing us with an iron fist. It's more that we're sort of entertaining ourselves into oblivion, right? And we're kind of championing and protecting the bars of our cage because they're so entertaining and so pleasurable, and we're just kind of often losing our minds to entertainment. And so I think that's the scary part of it, of the democratization. But like, instead of a big brother, we got a bunch of little brothers, right? And so everybody's got a cell phone, recording. NSA's got all of it, but every person can record something or other and has access to all this. So how do we help our society to have the positive shift into using that wisely? And it's probably some kind of reciprocity, and just like Uber, you've got ratings for drivers and riders, right? And that hopefully most of the time helps people to be responsible and respectful to each other when they're taking it. But yeah, it makes me think of this concept of omni thrive, that you know, comparing a human body to our society. So, your body is not at its best health when your liver wins in a grand battle against your heart or your lungs, right? So, like, when you've got this like uncoordinated competition between organs, you die, right? You get cancer or something shuts down and it doesn't work. When you're healthiest is when all of the organs and all of the systems within your body are at their maximum level of thriving and best level of operation. And I think the society is really similar. So, when we look at whether it's sort of socioeconomic levels or, pockets of different cultures and people and technological usage and business, like if we look at it from that more systems thinking level, that, a society that's omni thriving is one that is on the aggregate much healthier, stronger, economically powerful, ecologically respectful, connected, sustainable, that, using that type of mindset instead of like, we got to win against these other guys is, the more natural, healthier, and successful strategy.
Well, Justin, it's been a fascinating conversation with you. And
You
it
too.
seems like there's a lot of change ahead, but a lot of opportunity as well. And for those who haven't seen it yet, go check out Justin's book, right? What Could Go Right? And then, Justin, are there any projects or anywhere specific that people can find you online?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to learn more and read some articles, justincbean.com is where I have a lot of that, and links to the book and other things that I'm working on. So that's probably the easiest place to go. I'm also on LinkedIn and X and all that stuff.
Thanks for joining us for Socially Conscious AI with our guest, Justin Bean. If this discussion sparked new insights for you, we'd love for you to subscribe and join our community of AI optimists. And if you know someone navigating the complex world of ethical and sustainable AI, share this episode with them. It might be exactly what they need. For Valencio Cardoso, I'm Roman Burkott. Until next time, stay curious, stay conscious.